Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this sixth edition of the Quincus Talks. My name is Olivier. I'll be the host today, and I will introduce our panelists in just a second. The subject we're going to cover today is building the data bridge across e-commerce supply chain, supply and demand gap. And then I think it's going to be a very interesting subject. And for this subject, we've got two fantastic panelists. I will now introduce them. Our first panelist coming straight from his holiday, so thank you so much for joining us on this occasion. Dahar is a professionally qualified financial professional, and he's certified globally. And as an undergraduate, he's attained a master's degree in logistics and engineering, which is great for what we're going to discuss today. And Dahar has worked across a broad range of companies, starting from early stage startups to private equity, always in the e-commerce and fintech sector. And more recently, after 20 years of experience, Dahar is operating as the interim CFO and the strategy director for Rakuten, which is a very well-known global e-commerce company, and he's leading all the regional logistics initiatives. So welcome, Dahar, and thank you for joining us today. Our second speaker is Noman. Noman is a trainer and consultant with about 20 years of operational experience in supply chain management, leadership, world-class procurement, business process optimization, digital transformation. Again, so spot on for our subject today. Noman has spent a good part of his professional career in various areas of operations, supply chain management, across 8 different industries in 3 different countries. He's been leading operations both at a country level and a regional level, and he's been mentoring and coaching many in the domain, in the supply chain domain in terms of supply chain management. He's got a background in electronics engineering, and he's got an MBA as well, including also a professional diploma in supply chain management. So great to have you with us, Noman. And thank you so much for joining us on our panel today. The way the panel will work today is, so it will be recorded and it will be available following this session on social media. We have 3 key topics that we'll be covering and that our panelists will be answering. And if you have any questions at the bottom of the screen, you can share with us any questions. We are keeping time at the end of the session to cover the questions that are shared. So please do not hesitate and send us questions. With this being said, I will now start with our first subject, which is to talk about kind of the current e-commerce situation. So we fully know, and it might sound a little bit redundant at this point, but the past 2 years have not been normal. And it has impacted many aspects of our lives, but one of the aspects that has been impacted is the supply chains, and especially for e-commerce. There's been a massive fluctuation of demand for e-commerce. So I would like to get your thoughts, and we'll start with Noman for this question. Is what are your observations of the past year and how the supply chains have been impacted when it comes to e-commerce demand?
Thank you, Olivier, for the question. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. When we talk about 2020, it would be interesting to also look at 2019, where e-commerce was standing at that time. Definitely at the end of 2019, the COVID pandemic hit globally, and we started seeing a large amount of focus towards supply chain and how it was creating value for supply chain. People start to understand that how valuable supply chain is of availability of goods. Before that, it was more of a support function. People used to take it lightly. People used to take it, things happen. These guys are doing something. So if I look at numbers, I was going through a study sometime back in 2019, the e-commerce trade, when it comes to e-commerce retail, the share of it was approximately on a global level 14%. The pandemic, people believe that there's a huge impact, but I still see that there's a huge room for improvement. In 2020, this number only increased by a 3% on a global level. So according to that study, it moved from 14 to 17% only. But yes, it has opened a lot of opportunities in 2020 for people to understand where e-commerce can support them. A lot of startups have popped up, and a lot of companies have actually been able to mature themselves over the period of time by understanding, and the networking, resilience has brought into the supply chain. Dependency on single global sources has now been converted into sourcing from regional players, from local, and local industries have been improved. So e-commerce has basically allowed from an operational, from end-to-end supply chain to grow, and it has supported a lot. So that would be my observation, that what has happened over the last 1 year or 2 years into the industry, and now we are sitting in 2021, and again the same things are happening. Then mature e-commerce models are coming up, and previously e-commerce was predominantly into the retail sector, but now what I see with companies coming up into the logistics sector, I'm not talking about the last mile, but I'm talking about e-platforms coming up for warehousing, for trucking businesses, for freight forwarding. I will not go into the platform that I'm working with right now in Saudi Arabia, but yes, a lot has, people are very much aware that how e-commerce can substitute this traditional way of working and how it can add value to it. So that is my.
Great, thank you, Noman.
Okay.
And Taha, from your point of view, and Rakuten obviously has large e-commerce operations in Asia. It has some in some countries in Europe. I know France, for example, it's a big player. But how has Rakuten? What was the observation from Rakuten on the changes in the past 2 years?
Yeah, well, the Rakuten has put logistics as one of our 3 key focus areas as a company globally, and it probably traces back to 2017, 2018, where we know that we need to improve the consumer experience in terms of delivery. Traditionally, Rakuten has been a pure third-party marketplace, and hasn't been involved in the logistics part as deeply as perhaps we should have at an earlier point. And from around 2018, it has become a significant area of focus. So we were working on it prior to the pandemic anyway. I think what we obviously notice, particularly in the Europe region, we have a high dependency on supply from Asia and China in particular. And this was obviously significantly disrupted during the pandemic. We couldn't fulfill orders. We couldn't get the products we needed. There were a high demand on certain products that basically were not available, and it was just unprecedented, the level of demand. I think as the pandemic has gone on, the trend has actually been obviously to source more products locally, which has impacted some of the Asian business. But how that has changed is that we now need to look at how can we support those Asian sellers and stock products on the ground, and therefore there's a little bit of a race against time to find warehouse availability, warehouse capacity. But then on the tech side, it's not about having the physical infrastructure. A lot of the sellers and the merchants, and particularly those in a Rakuten context, they're more smaller to mid volume merchants. And while we have quite a strong fulfillment supply in Europe, one of the problems that we have is providing fulfillment in a very flexible way for the smaller to mid-sized volume sellers and merchants. And I think that's where there's been a lot of development, particularly in the last 12 to 18 months. A lot of the different startups helping smaller size merchants get access to the large logistics players, in terms of fulfillment space and fulfillment inventory, and being able to do that in a very seamless way on a technology front. I think that's where there's been a big shift and a big focus in the last 12 to 18 months. And as well, obviously, to build resilience, a lot of business will look to secure those supply chains, and particularly in the marketplace business, where we've traditionally allowed sellers and merchants to manage their own supply chain. We're now looking to probably take a little bit more influence to make sure that we're not at risk of these events. And I think it's not just COVID that we need to think about. I think before there was obviously the Hong Kong protests, there was the Suez Canal blockage, Brexit as well has been a big impact in Europe. So there's not just the pandemic, which has really accelerated a lot of the investment and innovation required to meet the demand.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I think it's interesting that, yes, I think from our current point of view, right, we think the pandemic is the only thing that ever changed the world, in a sense, because it's been going on for so long. And but I think you bring in a very interesting point, Dara, that it's not just the pandemic. There's other things that have been triggering the change. And then, Norman, in a sense, as you said, the e-commerce only grew by 3% between 2019 and 2020. Now, it is a massive growth when we think about it, right? We talk about billions and hundreds of billions of additional dollars being spent in a channel that was not typically spent on. But at the same time, it also shows that, look, there was already a decent volume before that, and that volume we knew was growing anyway. So no, that's great. I think that there's interesting, and I think that's you partly covered as well already my second question, which was around some of the challenges that the players are facing in terms of that. And Dara, you mentioned some of the a very good example where you had to source more locally. You were dealing with sellers in Asia, trying to bring it to Europe. There's a massive disruption. There still is an ongoing massive disruption in different places. So how do you tackle that? Norman, maybe from your point of view, any of the challenges you can think of that e-commerce players have been facing in the past year or two, that is new challenges, right? That doesn't necessarily come from other standard growth problem.
See, already, in the previous comment, what Dara mentioned was about the availability of products and how the Asian market was impacted, that people moved from a supply chain perspective, from a single sourcing to more regional and local players. So obviously the stockpiles or the inventory or that forecast that they were working on had greatly impacted. But I will take a little different approach to this question, and I will talk about, the differentiating between the e-commerce markets, between the developed countries and the developing or the underdeveloped countries. That right now, when we talk about e-commerce needs a certain level of infrastructure for it to grow and for it to be accepted into the marketplace. And when we talk about the emerging market or the developed countries or the first world countries, the infrastructure is already there. But the actual challenge which is happening for countries which are emerging markets, or rather say least developed markets, that they have persistent barriers available to them. And that is for me, that is the biggest challenge. And that is where the policy making and a great push from the government or from businesses need to come in. They need to come together and talk about the availability of good internet across the board, like not just into the main cities, but into the rural areas as well. Then there's a heavy reliance of cash. Till now, we talk about, there was a time when from cash to plastic, but now from cash to plastic, now we have got other payment modules. The Apple Pay is there, for example. I'm not marketing Apple Pay, but I'm just giving an example that how the crypto is there. There are a lot of other payment mechanisms which are still not developed in these least developed. The digital skill set of people that actually to use the applications or to use order online or use the e-commerce platform. So that would be my take on the challenges from on a macro level kind of a thing.
Good. No, that's that's a very fair point, and we have tendency to forget that different markets obviously have different level of challenges,
Yeah.
and then we're all here on Zoom sharing our video and it's smooth, right? And we sometimes forget that even a basic internet connection is obviously sometimes a key driver even in this conversation.
Yep.
I want to move to the core of our subject now, and I've seen that we're receiving already some questions, and they might be related to this, but we'll cover the questions at the end once we've covered the three key topics. And I want to start talking about data sharing, and really, my first question is a relatively simple one, and Tahar we'll start with you. What are some of the key categories of data do you see that as is critical for Rakuten to be efficient in its e-commerce operations?
Yeah, I mean, it's always how can we acquire more data and use data to drive the decisions. But if we talk about logistics, and this is one of the key reasons why Rakuten needs to play a greater role in logistics, is we need to have product availability, and we need to have product availability as early as possible. And particularly when we think about big sales events like a Black Friday or we run super sales, we need to have the hot products and the inventory well in advance to prepare our marketing channels for that. And that's one area where we're perhaps behind some of the competitors like Amazon, who will have visibility at an earlier point in the supply chain. They'll know the products that are at the warehouse at an earlier point, and therefore they're better able to ramp up their marketing activities and their marketing initiatives to cater for the product they have in stock. When we think about Rakuten, we might only have a shorter visibility of the available stock, maybe a week in advance of these big sales events, whereas other players may have that 3 or 4 weeks in advance. And then if they can have that obviously stocked locally, they're better able to fulfill those next day and very short delivery times that we have. So that's where I think the data is critical to us, is really in marketing preparation and getting ahead in marketing operations in terms of e-commerce, because it's all about having the visibility to the consumer as quickly as possible, and building up those channels. So I think that's the key data aspect from our side.
Got it. Interesting. Do you see any challenge when it comes, because you talk a lot about from an inbound, right, from the supply inbound coming in, which is that visibility there, which is a big piece of data, of information. Do you see any from the outbound perspective, do you see any challenges there? So about the order data, so the orders coming from your clients, then the shipments getting those deliveries to your clients. Do you see any challenge around that part of the data, or that is kind of, look, we've got it well covered? And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there is. I mean, obviously one of the key KPIs that we measure is our NPS score to consumers, and making sure that the experience, particularly on the delivery side, is really good. And this is very product category specific, but tracking deliveries, it may sound not a challenging, but it is actually a fundamental challenge that we face. I think particularly in our French business, we have about 60% of orders are tracked. So there's 40% where we're blind. We don't know when it's delivered, how long it's taken for delivery. And clearly the NPS score of consumers with those untracked deliveries is a lot worse than the NPS of tracked deliveries. So, I mean, it's a very fundamental thing that's missing, but being able to quantify and verify and validate the end delivery to the consumer, I think is a very key point. Not having contractual relationships in the last mile has impacted us. So if we contract with a DHL or a FedEx, obviously those are tracked. but that's traditionally not been our model. So that is, you know, it causes conflict. Do we change our model slightly to cater for those untracked packages? The other problem that we would have is that, and why it's product category specific, is sometimes the cost of track delivery for a low value product doesn't really make sense, and the consumer is unwilling to pay for it. So I think there's a lot of technological solutions that we should be able to improve our track deliveries. And in Japan, I think our track deliveries are like 80% with 20% untracked. So in Japan, we're a lot better on that perspective. But it is a fundamental challenge. It sounds quite strange in this day and age to say that, but yeah, we do struggle a little bit.
Yeah, understood. And but I think it's also very telling, right? That if a global business like Rakuten still sees this as a challenge, let's imagine how many other businesses have way more challenges than you do, right? They not everyone has the resources that you will have, and or the experience and the expertise to do so. No, that's great. Thank you. And I love the fact that you link the NPS to the tracking. You can really see an impact of track or on track. So something as simple as a last mile visibility to the client does impact the satisfaction of the service. Norman, from your perspective, maybe from a Middle East point of view across the GCCs, what have you seen in terms of those data silos and then the different categories of data that are so important for the e-commerce players to have access to?
See, definitely, e-commerce is a segment that is tremendously growing in this area of GCC. And not just GCC, I will even include the Central Asia and the subcontinent as well, that it is growing tremendously. There has been a lot of new e-startups coming up, and suddenly what I have experienced, like just last week, I was approached to provide an input about a new e-startup that from an investment perspective, that is it good enough for an investment to approach them and to do an investment into that setup. Now, when we talk about data visibility, right? We talked about, you mentioned on both the inbound and the outbound part of it. Fine, that is good. Again, data visibility or data access of how much of data we are taking in from this region as well. Like when you have the right data, that which products, which seasonality is available. So as Derek mentioned, that you can easily pile them up or at least bring them nearer to the selling node. And so that the lead time of the last mile delivery can be reduced, because everybody somehow denote that if it is an e-commerce business, it would be like a fast food service. Fine. But they do not understand the challenges behind it, that the products are not just coming from this region. A product must be flying in from Hungary, it might be coming in from the US, it might be coming in from Taipei. So that is a big challenge, and data visibility, and that is it basically helps break away the silos. If the consumer, if the channel partner and the distributor or the seller, if they are communicating it continuously and they have across the board transparency of data and the flow of data, then you don't really need to talk. You just need to look at the numbers, and you can easily decide on what next steps need to be done. And from an other perspective, that the data can allow the e-commerce business to go into behavioral targeting, because again, at the end of the day, if a customer is coming onto an e-commerce platform and is not able to decide and close the deal, then that data can at least give them that what next when they come, or how to target them again. Preferential pricing can be there, or dynamic pricing can be brought into the place to close the deal. You know, these data and breaking away the silos allow you to close the deals, to close the transaction, which is the most important part of e-commerce. Providing a platform, people coming in and browsing and going away, that's not what the e-commerce platforms are there for, the business is there. It's all about closing the deal. And so the data, breaking away the silos, crushing the silos, making it integrated, seamless, it allows start to end transaction to be closed quickly. So that is where ending of silos would support.
That's great. Thank you, Norman. And I guess if we go a step further, then breaking down those silos, we'll go back to the experience from Dara, which is getting better customer experience, will improve the turnaround, improve revenue, and obviously all of this is a beautiful virtuous cycle where we end up, the business grows on its own because all of the parts work well together. Before we move to our final subject, or final topic, sorry, I should say, in one sentence, and that's always a very challenge because one sentence is very tricky. Norman, how would you if you were to boil down supply chain visibility into one sentence, how would you define it? Let
me take it to the next level. How about one word?
Oh, that's I love that. Well, I don't know what Dahab is going to be able to answer in that one. Then you're stuck with one word or a picture.
Yeah, he would be stuck with one syllable or one letter then.
But go ahead, Norman. Yes.
For me, supply chain visibility boils down to trust.
Trust. Fine. Interesting.
Okay. Fine. If you are able to establish trust across the channel with your customers, with your suppliers, across the distributors, across your channel partners, that is where this is what supply chain visibility delivers at the end of the day. And trust is where seamless operations can come in, because now you trust the numbers which are coming in, you trust the commitments, you trust. So this is what, I preach as well, that if you need to have a seamless supply chain operation or an e-commerce platform or a business, a logistics, trust is everything in this world right now. So for me, I will boil down to trust.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that reverberates, and sometimes I've got I was talking to a client in Russia recently, and exactly that. There was lack of visibility, and the client, in a sense, lost trust. They said, "Look, I don't know what's going on. I don't feel comfortable working with you." Not in 2020, right? 15 years ago, it's like you order something like, it might arrive in 2 days, might arrive in a week, and you'll just expect it at some point, right? I remember as a kid, and that's kind of telling my age now, but as a kid, because phone calls were so expensive, and my grandparents were in France and I was in Canada, we used to send tape by letter, right? So we're recording ourselves on a tape and sending it by letter, but it would take weeks to arrive. But back then, even just sending that tape probably cost a lot of money at that time. But there was no concept of visibility, right? There was no expectation of it. Nowadays, there is an expectation, and without, if you're unable to deliver on it, you lose trust. How can you, how do you summarize supply chain visibility?
Well, I think Norman stole the best word there. I think trust is a very important element to it. And I suppose if I want to try and compete, I would say consumer experience, maximizing consumer experience, and making sure that you again get that trust of the consumer in being able to show their visibility. And then you obviously have to trust your suppliers and your own supply chain to deliver, because you're depending on them, particularly in a Rakuten context. We depend on them to perform to the level that we want, that our customers want. So we really have to push them to perform to the level that our customers expect from us. So I would echo the sentiment of trust 100%.
Great, thank you. That's fantastic. I want to move to the final topic before we open it up to the questions, which they're coming in. So thank you so much, everyone, for sending questions. We'll cover them soon. I want to talk a little bit about the e-commerce fulfillment ecosystem, and really there's one question that I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. When we've been talking around data and the different silos of data, and how do we make it all to work together? Then we've been talking about customer experience, right? And all that data is helping us deliver a better customer experience. And starting with you, Dahar, what are some of the innovations that you've seen, right? And you could have implemented them in Rakuten or not, right? But some of the innovations that you've seen that is helping bring efficiency and then leverage all the data that you potentially have access. And you already mentioned before, more data is better, yes. But how do you start leveraging this data and some of the innovations you've seen, and any concrete example. I think it's usually very interesting to see some concrete examples that you've seen.
Yeah, there's a great company in the US. I think they're called Takeaway, and they're specialists in micro fulfillment. And I think this is really, I really like this area of micro fulfillment because it's purely data driven, right? It's, I think when I studied logistics and supply chain 20 years ago, everybody talked about JIT and just in time, and everybody looked to Dell as the company to provide just in time production. But in fulfillment, the company Takeaway is doing a really good job, I think, in the US. And basically, they preemptively predict demand, and products are stocked into the micro fulfillment to meet the predicted demand. And that it can only be done using predictive analysis and a high value data set. It needs to be accurate. You can't predict to sell 200 books and 500 pairs of socks and the orders come in the opposite way around, and how precise that the predictive algorithms can match this. And I think that's a phenomenon when a lot of logistics moves to pure online. I think micro fulfillment, backed and accelerated by the push of consumers for more sustainable methods of transport as well. I think micro fulfillment will be a pretty key area in the future.
That's great, and we've been talking a lot as well recently as well around hyperlocal deliveries. Which your example of micro fulfillment is very relevant. I'm looking here in the UK now. In the past 6 months, there's been about at least half a dozen hyperlocal delivery services, and they all function very similar way. They all have a dark store, right? So if we take the example of the dark kitchens of the food delivery services, and they stock a certain amount of products, but they are limited in terms of size, of scale. So they really need to be efficient about keeping that stock filled with enough products to handle that demand without obviously overstocking, because the cost of stocking a product when you have very small margins, the cost of stocking a product becomes huge.
But if you think about it like almost in another way, if you were to stand in Madrid or Paris or London or Berlin or any city in Europe, within a 1 kilometer radius, there should be any product or most products that you would want within that radius stocked on physical store shelves.
Yeah.
And if you look at what Google has done with an acquisition of Pointy, it's allowing the offline stores upload their stock inventory online. And then you add that to, it's not micro fulfillment, but micro mobility. You in theory could be sitting in a cafe and say, oh, I want this, and order it, and it can come within 20 minutes. That should be capable once the data is there, and once you provide a channel to sell it. I don't see anybody doing that right now, but that is something that in theory could be possible in 5 or 10 years. That we don't necessarily use for large fulfillment centers on the edge of cities, but the stock that's held in physical stores can be delivered using micromobility in minutes. So
yeah, no, that's great, and I think that's some of the objectives of those hyperlocal companies is to start leveraging this value. Norman, so that the same question for you, some of the innovations in the field, especially when it comes to leveraging data, pick one, maybe one that you got partly excited about recently, and anything you can share with us.
Sure. I'll give an example of one company that I am partnering up for Saudi Arabia. Fine. So my company represent them. The company is out of UAE. The name is Hashmo. So it's basically a multimodal digital logistics platform. So the concept is, so far that we have been discussing right now on e-commerce and everything, has been more focused on the last mile. And the thing that I enjoy about this platform is that it talks about the first mile, the middle mile, and everything. Fine. So when I talk about multimodal right now, the issue which is happening globally right now, for example, is I need to move a shipment, but where are the containers? That is causing a problem, that maybe my freight forwarders are not strong enough for the to move that container. Maybe I need a better sourcing for that. So when I talk about innovation, for the reason I'm giving this example is that it has taken it out of every, it has increased the exposure of your this platform provides an exposure on a global level. Like right now, a company sitting in, I give you an example, a company right before a month back, there was a requirement of moving containers from Jakarta, fine, and they had to move from Jakarta, the consignment was filters, and they had to move to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Now, the easy way would have been to talk to their own freight forwarders in Jakarta to get it out. But on the platform, they raised their query. In 2 hours, that booking was done. And interestingly, that booking was picked up by a freight forwarder out of Pakistan. Fine. So the exposure, this is what I'm saying, that I will go again back to the earlier point of breaking silos. So the silos were that we were previously limited by the regional structures, that we only talk to our regional when we talk about first mile and these things. But suddenly a third country or a third region picked up that consignment and they delivered it. And again, the whole transaction through the platform, from raising the request to finalizing the booking of that containers was 2 hours. So that is the turnaround time. So the point is that a lot of innovations are coming in. And for me, again, Hashmove is a platform that is innovative, that is out there, and it is addressing a topic which on the first mile area, and which I have not seen that much. I've seen many other companies coming up as an e-platform on the warehousing part, on the transportation part. But whenever I look at them or I go deep into them, I find them more of digital agents, or digital booking agents or digital platform. But over here, Hashmove as an innovation connects the service providers. The supply and demand is being connected across the globe. So you're not limited by your regional or your local. Anybody, like a freight forwarder sitting out of UK with international operations, can pick up any query that they want to. So that would be my example of innovation.
Good, thank you, Noman. It's great to in a sense apply marketplace technology to service providers like that, when you really have tens of thousands of options worldwide.
Yep.
And you sometimes miss the opportunity that's out there. We've got 5 minutes left. I've picked 3 questions that I want us to cover, so we'll have to be very efficient. The first question is, in addition of e-commerce, what do we think is the channel, the impact of omni-channel as a strategy that has an impact on supply chain operating model? And I would love Dahab to get your thought on this, because Rakuten is a primarily e-commerce driven business. There's not really, I think, a concept of omni-channel, right, in the traditional sense of the word. So how would you think it would have an impact if Rakuten was to do omni-channel?
Yeah, you're right. If Rakuten was to do omni-channel, I think it's something I don't imagine Rakuten ever purchasing physical shop stores. But how we look at omni-channel is how can we drive our online consumers to the offline world. And that's usually our go-to e-commerce model outside of Japan. Is actually not marketplace, but what we would call open e-commerce. So we will promote products and brands through our affiliate networks and drive consumers to the offline world using potentially our payment methods and Rakuten Point to offline stores. I think one area that I really like in terms of omni-channel, if anyone knows the business in France called Miracle, it's like a marketplace platform which allows traditional retailers convert their platforms into marketplaces. But a lot of those retailers, or some of those retailers, have converted areas of their physical stores to allow their third-party marketplace sellers stock products in their physical stores, which I think is a really cool innovation in terms of omni-commerce. How does it impact on the fulfillment and logistics side? I think it's, again, you would probably take that option. You would probably partially put some products in a fulfillment center and then partially within a physical store. And therefore your overall fulfillment cost of total product is lower. I think that's probably where it makes sense in terms of the omni-channel approach.
Good, thank you, Dara. Great. I'll pick one more question for you, Noman, and then
Sure.
we'll close it. I apologize. I know there's many more questions, but we're tight on time. Noman, the question for you is, aside from visibility, what do you think are the other key factors for a smooth supply chain?
See, the visibility, again, everything boils down for me, when we talk about visibility, and I again link it to trust. See, even if I talk about data, it ends up onto visibility. If I talk about competence and everything, it boils down to, so that is something that I would come to, that do we have the right competence of the technology or supporting technology? I have seen it heavily right now that people think that, by employing technology, they can improve their supply chain operations. That is true, definitely. But technology has to be supported by the human element or the competency element as well. So for me, the important part is to increase the competency of your resources. Fine, and in resources, it comes the human capital as well, and also the technology that you employ. So it has to go in hand in hand. So for me, competency would be after visibility, that overall competency you need to improve your supply chain operations to make them more smooth and everything.
Great, thank you. And that's spot on time. Thank you so much for this. As we're closing, first I want to say, Noman, Dara, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for everyone for attending. As a final word, in addition to your final words, or I should say, if you can just tell everyone here how to get in touch with you, if anyone wants to follow up or has any further questions. Noman, if you can start.
See, I'm very easily available on LinkedIn. Fine. So for me, LinkedIn is the place to contact, and I usually do respond to messages. So I'm more than happy to connect, and all my contact details, just search Noman Ali, Noman Ali, and I'm more than willing to connect with anybody who wants to discuss further, or even, for anything. Even my company name is Supply Chain Talks. I love to talk. Fine. So the point is that I love to talk around supply chain. So always available.
Fantastic. Thank you, Noman. And Dara, for you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is an exceptional tool. So you can find me, search my name. It's totally fine. I'm also very happy to chat with anybody. I think our founder at Rakuten, Hiroshi Mikitani, always says there's a great power in conversation, and it's something I echo. I think obviously very interested in anything in the area of e-fulfillment. Yeah, that's kind of what I like at the moment. That's my hot topic.
Fantastic, thank you. And yes, let's continue the conversation. Dara, Noman, thank you so much again. For everyone else, thank you for joining us. We've just shared a survey, so if you can fill it out, we would highly appreciate to get your feedbacks and your thoughts, so we can continue improving on those events. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon or rest of the day wherever you are.
Thank you. Pleasure being here, and it was a pleasure to connect with you, Olivier and Dara, and we hope we keep in contact. And thank you for all the attendees for joining in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.